This opening chapter introduces Emma, an intelligent, hardworking, and emotionally resilient young woman who has spent her entire life believing that achievement can earn love. The audience is introduced to the deeply rooted family dynamic in which Emma's accomplishments are consistently overlooked while her younger brother, Ryan, receives admiration, attention, and unconditional support regardless of his actions. The chapter gradually establishes years of emotional neglect rather than obvious abuse. Emma's parents are not portrayed as villains shouting or insulting her constantly. Instead, they unintentionally communicate that Ryan's dreams always matter more. This subtle favoritism feels more realistic and emotionally painful, allowing the audience to recognize the injustice for themselves. Throughout the chapter, Emma remains hopeful. Every small disappointment is met with another quiet excuse she makes for her parents. She convinces herself that graduation, the biggest achievement of her life, will finally change everything. This optimism creates emotional investment because viewers naturally want her hope to be rewarded. As the chapter progresses, the contrast between Emma's public success and private loneliness becomes increasingly clear. Teachers, classmates, and school staff celebrate her accomplishments, while the people whose approval she values most barely acknowledge them. The emotional tension slowly rises until graduation day, where Emma delivers the greatest academic achievement of her life, only to discover that her parents have already left to attend Ryan's baseball tournament. The chapter reaches its emotional climax when Emma quietly asks why they weren't there. Rather than receiving comfort or an apology, she hears the sentence that permanently changes her life. "Stop begging for attention." Those words become the emotional wound that drives the entire story. By the end of the chapter, Emma doesn't argue, cry, or seek revenge. Instead, she makes a silent decision that she will never again chase love from people unwilling to give it. This quiet resolution creates anticipation for the next chapter, where the audience begins to wonder what kind of life Emma will build without her family's approval. Graduation morning begins before sunrise. Emma wakes up with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation, knowing she is about to deliver the valedictorian speech she has spent months preparing. She carefully irons her graduation gown, places her honor cords neatly on the bed, and rehearses the opening lines of her speech one final time. Downstairs, however, the atmosphere feels completely different. The kitchen conversation revolves around Ryan's baseball championship later that afternoon. Her father discusses batting statistics and game schedules, while her mother worries about traffic, parking, and arriving at the field on time. Neither parent asks Emma about her speech, her achievements, or how she is feeling on one of the biggest days of her life. Emma quietly waits for a simple compliment, a hug, or even a brief acknowledgement, but none comes. When she finally tries to mention graduation, the conversation quickly shifts back to Ryan's tournament. Rather than expressing frustration, Emma convinces herself that everything will change once her parents see her walk across the stage. Holding on to that hope, she leaves the house believing today might finally become the day she has dreamed about for years. "I woke up before my alarm, long before the first rays of sunlight reached my bedroom window. Sleep had barely visited me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured myself walking across the graduation stage, hearing my name announced as valedictorian, and finally seeing my parents smile the way they smiled for Ryan after every baseball game. It wasn't the diploma I wanted most. It was that single look of pride I had spent my entire childhood chasing." My graduation gown hung neatly from the closet door. I gently ran my hand across the fabric before lifting it down and laying it carefully on my bed. Next to it rested my honor cords, polished shoes, and the speech I had rewritten so many times that I could almost recite every word in my sleep. Even so, I read through it one last time, making tiny adjustments that probably didn't matter. I wanted everything to be perfect. Maybe perfection would finally be enough. Downstairs, I could already hear voices coming from the kitchen. My heart beat a little faster as I walked down the stairs. For one hopeful moment, I imagined Mom making my favorite breakfast or Dad asking to hear the opening of my speech. Instead, the television was showing highlights from last night's baseball games. Ryan sat at the table wearing his team jacket while Dad leaned over a printed tournament schedule. "If traffic gets bad, we'll have to leave right after the ceremony," Dad said. "Coach won't wait for us." Mom nodded while packing snacks into a cooler. Did you remember your lucky batting gloves, Ryan? They're in my bag. Good. Don't forget your cleats. I stood quietly in the doorway for a moment before forcing a smile. Morning. Morning, Dad answered without looking up. Mom smiled briefly. There's toast if you want some. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down, hoping someone would remember what today meant. Nobody did. The conversation never left Ryan's tournament. They talked about pitching rotations, weather forecasts, parking near the field, and where everyone would eat afterward. I listened while staring into my coffee. Finally, I cleared my throat. I finished practicing my speech. Mom looked up for only a second. I'm sure you'll do fine, sweetheart. Then she turned back to Ryan. What time does Coach want everyone there? An hour early. Dad checked his watch. That means we'll have to leave as soon as Emma gets her diploma. Not after my speech. Not after the ceremony. As soon as I got my diploma. I felt something tighten inside my chest. But I refused to let it show. Maybe they just didn't realize how important the speech was. Maybe once they saw me standing on that stage, everything would change. That thought had carried me through years of disappointment. I wasn't ready to let go of it now. I finished breakfast, folded my speech one last time, and picked up my graduation cap. As I stepped outside, the cool morning air brushed against my face. The sky was bright and clear, the kind of day people usually remembered for the rest of their lives. I smiled to myself as I climbed into the car. No matter how this morning had started, I still believed the best part of the day was waiting for me. When we arrived at the school, the parking lot was already overflowing with cars. Families walked toward the auditorium carrying flowers, balloons, and cameras. Parents wrapped their arms around their children, stopping every few steps to take another picture. Laughter echoed across the campus, mixing with excited conversations about college plans and summer vacations. I stepped out of the car and adjusted my graduation gown. You've got 20 minutes, Dad said, glancing at his watch. We should have plenty of time. I smiled. The speech is right after everyone is seated. Good, he replied distractedly. Hopefully they keep things moving. Mom was already checking the weather forecast on her phone. If we leave by noon, we'll still make Ryan's warm-ups. Ryan shrugged. Coach said anybody who's late starts on the bench. Dad nodded seriously, as though nothing else happening today carried the same importance. I looked toward the auditorium entrance where my classmates were hugging their parents. Some families had brought bouquets nearly as tall as the graduates themselves. Others carried handmade signs covered in glitter and school colors. One of my closest friends, Lily, hurried over with her parents. There you are, she said, wrapping me in a hug. Can you believe today's finally here? I know, I laughed. It still doesn't feel real. Her mother smiled warmly. Emma, we can't wait to hear your speech. Lily hasn't stopped talking about how proud everyone is of you. Thank you. Her father extended his hand. Congratulations, young lady. Finishing first in your class is something you'll remember forever. His words meant more than he probably realized. For a brief second, I glanced toward my own parents, hoping they might add something. Instead, Dad was asking Ryan if he'd packed an extra baseball. Lily noticed where I was looking but didn't say anything. I'll save you a seat backstage, she whispered before walking away. I watched her family disappear into the crowd. Laughing together. Part of me wondered what that felt like. A teacher called my name from across the courtyard. Emma, there you are. Mrs. Patterson hurried over carrying a clipboard. I've been looking for you everywhere. I'm sorry. She smiled. Don't apologize. I just wanted to tell you how proud we all are. Your speech rehearsal yesterday was beautiful. Thank you. I've taught for 20.8 years, she continued softly, and you're one of the hardest working students I've ever had. I felt my cheeks grow warm. That means a lot. It should. Now go enjoy your day. As she walked away, I caught Dad checking his watch again. We should head inside, Mom said. The sooner this starts, the sooner we can get going. Those words landed quietly inside me. The sooner we can get going. Not because they wanted to celebrate afterward. Not because they were excited for me. Because they had somewhere else they'd rather be. I took a slow breath and looked at the auditorium doors. Maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe once they heard my name announced, once they saw everyone stand and applaud, something inside them would finally change. Holding on to that hope, I straightened my graduation cap and walked toward the entrance, believing the moment I'd waited for my entire life was only minutes away. The graduates were asked to gather behind the stage 15 minutes before the ceremony began. I followed the line of blue gowns through the side hallway, holding my speech with both hands. My palms were damp despite the cool air inside the building. The hallway buzzed with nervous excitement. Some students practiced their speeches under their breath. Others laughed while taking selfies with friends they had known since kindergarten. Teachers moved from group to group offering encouragement, straightening graduation caps, and reminding everyone to enjoy the moment. Mrs. Patterson found me near the curtain. "Feeling ready?" she asked with a smile. "I think so. I know so." She gently adjusted the tassel on my cap. "You've earned every second of today, Emma." Her words settled my nerves more than she probably realized. The principal walked over carrying a small stack of note cards. "Emma," he said warmly, "after the class president finishes, you'll head straight to the podium." "Yes, sir. I've read your speech twice already." He smiled. "Don't be surprised if there aren't many dry eyes." I laughed softly. "I'll try not to cry first. I have a feeling you'll do just fine." As he walked away, I carefully peeked through a small opening in the stage curtain. The auditorium was nearly full. Hundreds of families filled the seats. Parents leaned into the aisles, waving excitedly whenever they spotted their children backstage. Camera flashes sparkled across the room like tiny stars. I searched instinctively for my own family. Near the middle of the auditorium, I finally spotted them. Mom was looking down at her phone. Dad leaned toward Ryan, pointing at something on the baseball schedule folded in his lap. Ryan wasn't even facing the stage. I smiled anyway. At least they were here. That was enough. The ceremony began with the school choir singing the national anthem. The audience stood together before settling back into their seats. One by one, students crossed the stage to receive academic awards, athletic scholarships, and community service honors. Every announcement brought another wave of applause. As more names were called, I glanced toward my parents again. Dad checked his watch. Mom whispered something to him. Ryan looked impatient. A quiet knot formed in my stomach. The class president stepped to the microphone and welcomed everyone to graduation. Then the principal returned. "And now," he announced, "it is my privilege to introduce this year's valedictorian." The room erupted into applause. My name echoed through the auditorium. I stood, took a slow breath, and walked toward the podium. From the corner of my eye, I searched for my parents one more time. Their seats were empty. For a brief second, I wondered if I had looked in the wrong direction. I blinked and searched again. Nothing. Only 3 empty chairs where my family had been sitting moments earlier. The applause slowly faded as I reached the microphone. My carefully prepared speech rested in my hands, but the words suddenly felt much heavier than paper. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Somewhere outside this auditorium, my parents were already driving toward Ryan's baseball tournament. I closed my eyes for a single heartbeat before looking back at the audience. If I couldn't give this speech for the people I loved most, then I would give it for everyone who had believed in me when I struggled to believe in myself. I looked across the auditorium one last time, hoping I had somehow made a mistake. Maybe they had simply stepped outside. Maybe Ryan needed to use the restroom. Maybe they would walk back through those doors before I finished my first sentence. I held on to those thoughts because the alternative hurt too much. The principal smiled encouragingly as he stepped away from the microphone. The room became quiet. Hundreds of faces looked toward me, waiting. I unfolded my speech with hands that felt strangely calm despite the ache growing inside my chest. "Good morning," I began. My voice sounded steadier than I expected. "Today isn't just about grades or awards. It's about every early morning, every late night, every mistake that taught us something, and every person who believed we could become more than we imagined. The audience listened quietly. As I continued speaking, I stopped searching for the empty seats. Instead, I looked at the parents who couldn't take their eyes off their children. Some smiled proudly. Others wiped away tears. A little girl in the front row held up a handmade sign that read, "Congratulations, big sister." I smiled without meaning to. I wondered what it must feel like to know, without question, that someone was proud of you. My speech wasn't about perfect grades anymore. It became something more honest. There will be moments in life when the people you hope will notice your hard work don't, I said softly. That doesn't mean your work has no value. Sometimes the person who needs to believe in you the most is you. The words surprised even me. I hadn't planned to say them. Yet somehow they felt truer than anything I had written. The auditorium remained completely silent. Then I noticed Mrs. Patterson in the front row. She smiled through tears and gave me the smallest nod. I continued. We don't always choose the families we're born into. But we do choose the kind of people we become. Kindness, integrity, and perseverance are decisions we make every single day. When I finished, the room was quiet for a heartbeat. Then everyone stood. Applause filled the auditorium. It wasn't polite applause. It was loud, warm, lasting. Teachers stood first. Then parents. Then the entire graduating class. I looked across the crowd one final time. 3 empty seats. Nothing had changed. The applause continued as I stepped away from the podium. Several classmates hugged me backstage. That was incredible, Lily whispered. I've never seen a graduation speech like that. Mrs. Patterson wrapped me in a gentle embrace. You should be so proud of yourself. Thank you, I whispered. For a moment, I almost asked if she had seen my parents leave. Instead, I stayed silent. I already knew the answer. A few minutes later, the ceremony ended, and graduates poured outside to celebrate with their families. Flowers filled the sidewalks. Parents laughed while taking pictures. Grandparents hugged their grandchildren. Children ran between groups carrying balloons. I stood alone near the front steps, holding my diploma against my chest. The parking lot where my parents' car had been was empty. I reached into my pocket and looked at my phone. No messages. No missed calls. No congratulations. Only a group text from my mother. Ryan won his first game. We'll talk tonight. I stared at the screen for several seconds before slipping the phone back into my pocket. For the first time in my life, I wondered if chasing their approval had been a race I was never meant to win. The drive home was painfully quiet. Ryan sat in the back seat talking excitedly about the game-winning catch he had made in the 7th inning. Dad praised every play as though he had been watching a championship instead of a local high school tournament. Mom laughed whenever Ryan exaggerated a story, asking questions and smiling in the rearview mirror. I stared out the passenger window. My graduation cap rested on my lap beside the diploma I had imagined they would ask to hold. No one had. About halfway home, Mom finally looked at me. How did everything go? For a second. I honestly thought she was joking. You left before my speech. She blinked. We knew you'd understand. Dad nodded without taking his eyes off the road. Ryan's game started earlier than expected. I waited for the apology that never came. I was the valedictorian, I said quietly. I gave the graduation speech. We know, Mom replied. Your principal mentioned it before we left. You knew, and you still left. Dad sighed as if I were making something simple unnecessarily difficult. Emma, your brother's team was counting on him. So was I. The words escaped before I could stop them. Nobody answered. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in the back seat. I told them they could stay, he said softly. Dad quickly interrupted. Ryan, this isn't your fault. I know, Ryan murmured, looking down. Neither of us spoke again for the rest of the drive. That evening, relatives began posting graduation pictures online. Not mine. Ryan's. There were photos of him holding a baseball trophy with captions celebrating his determination and bright future. My graduation wasn't mentioned once. I quietly carried my diploma upstairs and placed it on my desk beside years of certificates, medals, and report cards. The room was filled with proof that I had spent my life trying to earn something that couldn't be measured. Love. Approval. Recognition. A knock came at my bedroom door. For one hopeful second, I thought maybe Mom had finally come to talk. Instead, Dad stepped inside. "You upset your mother today." I looked at him in disbelief. "I upset her. You embarrassed everyone by acting disappointed." I was disappointed. He folded his arms. "Life isn't always about you, Emma." I felt something inside me crack. I never asked for everything to be about me. He remained silent. "I just wanted you to stay long enough to hear my speech." Dad shook his head. "You're making too much of this. I graduated first in my class. And we're proud of you." The words sounded automatic. Empty. "If you're proud of me," I asked quietly, "why does it never feel that way?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the hallway before saying something that would stay with me for years. "Ryan needs encouragement more than you do." I stared at him. "So because I work hard, you don't need as much attention." The sentence hung in the room between us. Years of birthdays, school plays, honor roll ceremonies, science fairs, academic awards. Every forgotten moment suddenly made sense. I had mistaken neglect for confidence. They hadn't believed I was stronger. They had simply stopped seeing me. Dad reached for the doorknob. "Don't dwell on it." As he turned to leave, Mom's voice drifted down the hallway. "Emma." I stepped into the doorway, hoping she had come to say everything Dad hadn't. She looked at me with visible frustration. "You've been trying to make today all about yourself." I opened my mouth to respond. Before I could speak, she said the words that would echo in my mind for the next 10 years. "Stop begging for attention." She walked away without waiting for an answer. I stood there alone, realizing that something inside me had quietly come to an end. Not my love for them. Just my belief that one more achievement would finally make them love me back. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I'd lock my bedroom door, bury my face in my pillow, and let years of disappointment finally catch up with me. Instead, I sat quietly at my desk with my graduation cap beside me and my diploma still inside its navy blue folder. The house was unusually peaceful. Downstairs, I could hear Ryan laughing while he replayed highlights from his game with Dad. Mom's laughter drifted through the floorboards every few minutes. They sounded happy. It was strange. The biggest day of my life had ended, and somehow it felt as though nothing had happened. I opened the top drawer of my desk and placed my diploma beside every report card, certificate, and medal I had collected over the years. Second grade spelling champion. Middle school science fair. Honor roll. State academic scholarship. Student council. National Honor Society. Each award represented another moment I believed would finally make my parents proud. Now they looked like pieces of paper belonging to someone else's life. I closed the drawer gently. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had spent years avoiding. What if nothing I ever achieved would be enough? The thought frightened me. Not because I believed it wasn't true. Because deep down, I already knew it was. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Ryan stood outside my room. He looked uncomfortable. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He stepped inside, holding something behind his back. He hesitated before handing me a baseball. It was signed by every player on his team. "They wanted me to give this to you." I looked at him, confused. "They did?" Ryan nodded. "I told them I was leaving my sister's graduation early." He rubbed the back of his neck. "They thought it was messed up." I couldn't help smiling a little. "They actually said that. They asked why Mom and Dad couldn't just come to my second game." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, Ryan sighed. "I'm sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for." "I do." He looked down at the floor. "They've always done this." I stayed quiet. I used to think it was normal. His voice became almost a whisper. "But today." He swallowed hard. I kept thinking about your speech. You weren't there. No. He shook his head. But Coach streamed it on his phone after the game. I stared at him. You watched it. The whole team did. A lump formed in my throat. They clapped. Ryan smiled sadly. Coach said your parents missed something they'd regret one day. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Ryan wasn't the problem. He had never asked to be the favorite. He had simply grown up inside the same family I had. I wish things were different, he said. So do I. He placed a hand on my shoulder before quietly leaving my room. After the door closed, I looked at the signed baseball resting in my hands. It was the only congratulations I had received from anyone in my family. Oddly enough, it was enough to remind me that kindness could still exist inside broken places. I walked over to my bedroom window. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights stretched across the empty road. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks lit up the sky for another school's graduation celebration. I watched them disappear one by one. Then, without anger or tears, I made the quietest promise I had ever made. I would stop chasing approval from people determined not to give it. From this day forward, I would build a life that belonged to me, not one designed to earn applause that was never coming. I didn't realize it then, but that silent promise would change the next 10 years of my life in ways none of us could have imagined. The next morning, the house felt strangely ordinary. Mom hummed softly while making coffee. Dad sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper. Ryan had already left early for baseball practice. No one mentioned graduation. No one asked where I planned to go to college. No one congratulated me. It was as if the most important day of my life had quietly disappeared overnight. I stood in the doorway for a moment before pouring myself a cup of coffee. Mom glanced at me briefly. Your Aunt Linda called yesterday. I waited. She said congratulations. That's nice. She wanted to know where you're going to college. I haven't decided yet. Mom nodded absent-mindedly. You should stay close to home. I looked at her. You've never asked where I wanted to go. She stirred her coffee. I assumed you'd figure it out. The conversation ended there. For years I would have kept trying. I would have searched for another chance to be noticed. Another opportunity to earn approval. Another perfect report card. Another award. But something inside me had changed. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a door closing without anyone hearing it. Over the next few weeks, acceptance letters continued arriving in the mail. Each envelope represented years of hard work. Scholarships. Honors programs. Leadership awards. One afternoon I spread every letter across my bedroom floor. Some schools were only a few hours away. Others were on the opposite side of the country. One envelope caught my attention again. It was from a university nearly 2,000 miles from home. Full tuition. Housing. Research opportunities. Everything I had dreamed about. I picked up the letter and smiled. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about whether my parents would approve. I was asking myself a different question. What do I want? The answer surprised me. I wanted distance. Not because I hated my family. Because I needed room to become someone who wasn't constantly measuring her worth by their attention. That evening I waited until everyone finished dinner. I've made my college decision. Dad looked up. Oh. I'm accepting the scholarship at Westbridge University. Silence. Mom frowned. That's far. It is. When do classes start? Late August. Dad folded his napkin. Have you looked at schools closer to home? I did. And I chose the one that's best for my future. He leaned back in his chair. I figured you'd stay nearby. You never asked. Neither parent answered. Ryan quietly looked between us. Finally Mom spoke. Well, if that's what you want. No excitement. No questions. No celebration. Just acceptance. It hurt less than I expected. Maybe because I had already stopped expecting more. Later that night, I packed my first cardboard box. Books. Notebooks. A framed picture of my grandmother. The signed baseball Ryan had given me. My valedictorian medal. As I folded another sweater into the box, I looked around my bedroom. Every corner held a memory of a girl who believed love could be earned. I smiled sadly. She had tried her best. Now it was time to become someone who no longer needed permission to believe she mattered. Outside my window, the summer breeze rustled the trees. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt open. And somewhere beyond the life I had always known, a new chapter was quietly waiting for me. 3 months passed faster than I expected. Summer quietly slipped away, replaced by moving boxes, farewell lunches with classmates, and countless checklists taped to my bedroom wall. Every day brought me one step closer to leaving home, yet the atmosphere inside our house barely changed. Ryan's baseball trophies continued filling the shelves in the living room. My graduation medal remained inside a cardboard box. No one ever asked to see it. The night before I left for college, I carried my final suitcase downstairs. Mom was folding laundry while Dad watched another baseball game from his recliner. "I leave tomorrow morning," I said. Dad looked up for only a moment. "What time?" "7. He nodded. "I'll probably already be at work." Mom folded another towel. "I have to drive Ryan to conditioning practice." I waited. Maybe one of them would say they'd rearrange their schedule. Maybe they'd offer breakfast. Maybe they'd ask if I needed help. Instead, Mom smiled politely. "You'll do fine." Those 3 words somehow felt both comforting and painfully distant. "I know." I picked up my suitcase again and carried it back upstairs. Ryan knocked on my bedroom door later that evening. "You busy?" "Not really." He stepped inside holding a small paper bag. "I got you something." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Inside the bag was a navy blue notebook with a leather cover. The first page already had something written on it. "For all the stories you'll write after leaving this place." I laughed softly. "I don't even know if I'll write stories." "You always write." He shrugged. "You just don't let anyone read them." I smiled. He wasn't wrong. Whenever life became confusing, I wrote. Not because I wanted anyone else to understand me. Because I needed to understand myself. "I'll use it." "I know you will." Ryan looked around my nearly empty room. "It's going to be weird without you here." "I'll come visit." "I hope so." He hesitated. I wish things had been different. I knew exactly what he meant. "So do I." Before leaving, he pulled me into a quick hug. It was awkward. Unexpected. Completely genuine. "Go make them regret underestimating you," he whispered. After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed holding the notebook in my lap. Those words stayed with me. Not because I wanted revenge. Because, for the first time, someone in my family believed I could build a life bigger than this house. The next morning arrived quietly. The sun had barely risen when I loaded the last suitcase into my old sedan. Mom stepped onto the porch carrying a travel mug. "Drive safely." "I will." She hugged me briefly. It felt more like habit than emotion. Dad walked outside a minute later. He shook my hand. "I'm proud of you." I looked into his eyes, searching for the warmth those words were supposed to carry. They felt rehearsed. Almost obligatory. "Thank you." Neither of us knew what else to say. Ryan jogged out of the house carrying a small envelope. "Don't open it until you get there." I slipped it into my backpack. "I promise." With one final look at the only home I had ever known, I climbed into the driver's seat. As the engine started, I expected to feel sadness. Instead, I felt something lighter. For the first time in my life, the road ahead wasn't leading me toward someone else's expectations. It was leading me toward a future that finally belonged to me. Emma, if you're reading this, you've already made it farther than anyone expected. Not because other people doubted you. Because you've spent your whole life doubting whether you were enough. I know you don't believe me when I say this, but one day you'll understand that none of this was your fault. Love. Ryan. I folded the letter carefully before placing it back inside the envelope. By then, I was already parked outside my dormitory, surrounded by hundreds of students unloading boxes from crowded cars. Parents laughed as they carried mini refrigerators up narrow staircases. Mothers adjusted pillows. Fathers argued over assembly instructions for cheap bookshelves. The campus buzzed with excitement. It looked exactly like the brochures. Beautiful brick buildings stretched across rolling green lawns. Tall oak trees shaded the sidewalks, and students wearing university shirts welcomed every arriving freshman with smiles that felt surprisingly genuine. I sat inside my car for another minute. For the first time, there was no one telling me where to go. No one comparing me to Ryan. No one deciding what mattered more than I did. The silence felt unfamiliar. It also felt peaceful. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car. Almost immediately, 2 student volunteers hurried toward me. "Welcome to Westbridge," one of them said cheerfully. "You must be Emma." I blinked. "You know my name?" She laughed. "We've been expecting our scholarship students all morning." She checked my name off a clipboard before handing me a welcome packet. "Congratulations, by the way." Those 2 words still caught me off guard. Congratulations. They came so naturally from complete strangers. Meanwhile, I'd spent 18 years waiting to hear them at home. My dorm room was small but bright. Sunlight poured through a large window overlooking the center courtyard. 1 bed. 1 desk. 2 bookshelves. It wasn't much. To me, it felt like freedom. My roommate hadn't arrived yet, giving me time to unpack quietly. I placed my books on the shelf. Hung my graduation medal beside my desk. Set Grandma's photograph near the window. Finally, I opened Ryan's notebook. The first blank page waited patiently. Without thinking, I picked up a pen. August 24th. Today I moved into college. I thought leaving home would hurt more than this. Maybe home isn't always a place. Maybe sometimes it's the first place where you're finally allowed to become yourself. I closed the notebook. Those words felt honest. More honest than anything I had admitted before. Orientation week passed quickly. Classes hadn't even started, yet life already felt different. Professors introduced themselves by first name. Upperclassmen offered directions before anyone asked. People actually listened when I spoke. One afternoon, my academic advisor invited me into her office. She studied my transcript for several moments before smiling. "I've read hundreds of applications." I waited. "Yours stood out." "Really?" She nodded. "Not because of your grades." I looked surprised. "Because every recommendation letter described the same thing." I leaned forward. "What was that?" She smiled. "They all said you make everyone around you better." Nobody had ever described me that way before. Not once. For years, I believed my value came from achievements. Apparently, other people saw something entirely different. As I walked back across campus, I realized something that had never occurred to me growing up. Maybe success wasn't about proving people wrong. Maybe it was about finally meeting the version of yourself that had always been waiting beneath the need for someone else's approval. I didn't know it then, but that lesson would become the foundation for everything I built over the next 10 years. The first semester challenged me in ways I hadn't expected. Not academically. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the smartest person in every classroom. Everyone at Westbridge had been at the top of their high school class. Every lecture hall was filled with students who had sacrificed weekends, holidays, and sleep to get there. Instead of feeling intimidated, I found it strangely comforting. For once, I didn't have to prove I belonged. I simply did. My days settled into a routine. Morning lectures. Afternoon research labs. Evening study sessions at the library. Late-night coffee with classmates who quickly became friends. Nobody cared about where I came from. Nobody compared me to Ryan. Nobody expected me to compete for someone's attention. People appreciated effort, kindness, reliability. It felt like breathing fresh air after years inside a crowded room. One rainy afternoon, Professor Harris stopped me after class. "Emma, do you have a minute?" "Of course." He closed his notebook and smiled. "I've noticed something about you." I waited. You always stay behind to help other students. I shrugged. They'd do the same for me. Maybe. He leaned against his desk. But most people are too busy thinking about themselves. I laughed quietly. I guess I've never been very good at that. His expression softened. Don't lose that. Those words stayed with me long after I left his classroom. By Thanksgiving, campus had begun to empty. Students packed their cars, excited to spend the holiday with their families. The parking lots filled with hugs and laughter. Are you heading home? My roommate, Sophie, asked while folding clothes into a suitcase. I hesitated. No. She looked surprised. Your family's not expecting you? I told them I was staying here. Why? I smiled politely. I've got a lot of studying. It wasn't exactly a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Going home meant pretending nothing had happened. Pretending graduation didn't matter. Pretending those words had never been spoken. Stop begging for attention. I wasn't ready. That Thanksgiving morning, the campus felt almost silent. Most dorm rooms were empty. The cafeteria served a simple holiday meal for students who couldn't travel. I carried my tray toward a corner table, expecting to eat alone. Emma. I looked up. Professor Harris waved from across the room. Come join us. At his table sat his wife, 2 grown daughters, and 3 other students who had also stayed on campus. You shouldn't spend Thanksgiving by yourself, his wife said warmly. Without waiting for an answer, she handed me a plate of homemade pumpkin pie. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Nobody asked uncomfortable questions. Nobody made me explain why I wasn't home. They simply included me. As dinner ended, Professor Harris raised his coffee cup. To unexpected family. Everyone smiled. I felt something tighten in my throat. Not sadness. Gratitude. For the first time, I understood something Grandma had once told me when I was 12. Family isn't only the people you're born to. Emma. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stay. Back then, I hadn't understood what she meant. Now I did. That evening, I returned to my dorm and found my phone blinking with a missed call from Mom. There was no voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. Hope school is going well. Happy Thanksgiving. I stared at the screen. It was the first message she'd sent in nearly 3 months. I typed a response. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope everyone had a nice day. She replied almost immediately. Ryan's team won another championship. He's really excited. I smiled sadly. Some things never changed. I set the phone aside without replying again. Instead of feeling hurt, I felt something unexpected. Distance. Not coldness. Not anger. Just enough space to realize that my happiness no longer depended on whether they ever learned how to celebrate mine. Outside my dorm window, the first snowflakes of winter drifted quietly across the campus. I watched them fall, feeling an unfamiliar sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me I mattered. I was finally beginning to believe it myself. Winter turned into spring before I realized how much I had changed. Not because my grades improved. Not because I collected more awards. Because I had stopped measuring my worth by how often my parents noticed me. Life on campus became fuller with each passing month. I joined a research project through the economics department, spent weekends tutoring first-year students, and eventually accepted a part-time job in the university library. The work wasn't glamorous, but I loved the quiet rhythm of organizing books, helping students find resources, and spending evenings surrounded by people who valued learning as much as I did. For the first time, success felt peaceful instead of exhausting. One afternoon, Professor Harris stopped by my desk at the library. I've been looking for you. I smiled. Hopefully that's a good thing. It is. He handed me a folder. I nominated you for a summer leadership fellowship. I blinked. You nominated me? You earned it. I opened the folder carefully. The fellowship was one of the university's most competitive programs. Only 10 students would be selected from hundreds of applicants. I don't know what to say. Say you'll apply. I laughed. I will. As he walked away, I looked down at the application. Back home, I would have immediately wondered whether my parents would finally be impressed. This time, that thought never crossed my mind. I wanted it because I wanted it. That realization felt surprisingly liberating. A week later, my phone rang during lunch. It was Dad. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. He rarely called. I answered. "Hi, Dad." "Hey." His voice sounded almost awkward. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." A long silence followed. "So, how's school?" "It's going well." "Good." Another silence. Then he cleared his throat. "Ryan made varsity. I'm happy for him." "I figured you would be." I waited. There was something unusual about the conversation. Normally, every phone call revolved entirely around Ryan. This time, Dad sounded like he was searching for something to say. "Your mom wanted me to tell you hello. Tell her I said hello too." "I will." Another pause. "We should let you get back to studying." "Okay." Before hanging up, he quietly added, "We're glad things are working out for you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was the first time either of my parents had acknowledged my life without immediately comparing it to Ryan's. When the call ended, I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I didn't know whether to feel hopeful or cautious. Maybe both. By the end of the semester, the fellowship committee announced the results. Students crowded around the bulletin board inside the administration building. Someone shouted my name. "Emma." I hurried over. There it was. Emma Carter. Selected. For a moment, I simply stared. Months earlier, I would have reached for my phone to call home. Instead, I found myself looking around for the people who had actually walked beside me through every late night and every difficult assignment. Professor Harris stood near the back of the crowd, smiling proudly. Sophie wrapped me in an excited hug. "You did it. I can't believe it." "I can." Professor Harris stepped forward and shook my hand. "This is only the beginning." As applause echoed through the hallway, I realized something I had never understood growing up. Real encouragement doesn't make you feel like you have something to prove. It makes you believe you're already capable of becoming even more than you imagined. Standing there among people who celebrated my success without conditions, I quietly thanked the frightened 18-year-old girl who had driven away from home believing she wasn't enough. She had been wrong. She had always been enough. She had simply been looking for validation in the wrong place. I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "There's a coffee shop across the street." Relief flickered across his face. "I'd like that." Neither of us spoke as we crossed the street. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt cautious, like two strangers trying to remember they were once family. The cafe was nearly empty that afternoon. Rain tapped softly against the windows while quiet jazz played through hidden speakers. We chose a table near the back. Dad wrapped both hands around his coffee cup but didn't drink. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you." For the first time in my life, he didn't try to defend himself. That surprised me more than his visit. He took a slow breath. "I've started this conversation 100 times in my head. And I got every version wrong." I nodded slightly. "Then don't rehearse it." He looked down at the table. "I've spent years telling myself we did our best." Another pause. "But the older I get," his voice cracked, "the harder it becomes to believe that." Outside, rain rolled down the cafe windows in slow streams. "I read your graduation speech." I looked up. "You did." "Ryan gave me a copy a few years ago." I hadn't known that. "I've read it dozens of times." He swallowed. "Every time I reach the part where you say that sometimes the person who has to believe in you is yourself." He stopped speaking. "I realize you were talking about us." I didn't answer. Because he was right. I missed so much. He laughed bitterly. "I convinced myself you didn't need encouragement because you always did well." His eyes filled with regret. "I thought I was helping the child who struggled." "You forgot the child who stopped asking." The words escaped quietly. Dad closed his eyes. "I know." For several moments neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. I found this. He slid it across the table. I recognized it immediately. It was my kindergarten report card. Across the top, written in oversized pencil letters, 6-year-old me had answered a classroom assignment. When I grow up, I want my mom and dad to be proud of me. The paper trembled in my hands. I found it in a storage box while cleaning the attic. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I sat there for an hour. He looked away. I kept wondering how early we taught you that our love had to be earned. A tear rolled down my cheek before I realized I was crying. Not because I hated him. Because I suddenly understood something. He wasn't asking me to erase the past. He was grieving it too. I can't change what happened, he said. I know. I don't expect forgiveness today. I know. I just. He struggled to finish. Needed you to know that I finally see it. The little girl inside me had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. She imagined yelling. Walking away. Making him feel the loneliness she had carried for years. Instead, I felt tired. Not angry. Just tired. I spent a long time believing something was wrong with me. His shoulders slumped. I know. I thought if I worked harder, got better grades, won more awards. I smiled sadly. You'd finally choose me. Dad covered his face with one hand. I'm so sorry, Emma. Those 4 words carried more weight than every automatic "I'm proud of you" I'd ever heard. The apology didn't erase my childhood. It didn't rewrite graduation day. It didn't silence the words, "Stop begging for attention." But it did something else. It allowed me to stop carrying the hope that one day he might understand. Because now, he finally did. And for the first time in 10 years, neither of us needed to pretend otherwise. Dad didn't ask for forgiveness again. He didn't try to explain away the past or remind me of the sacrifices they had made. He simply sat across from me, looking like a man who had finally reached the end of every excuse he'd ever believed. After a while, he smiled sadly. You still drink coffee with too much cream. I laughed quietly. I guess some things don't change. No. He looked out the rain-covered window. They don't. For the first time that afternoon, the silence felt peaceful. Not because everything had been repaired. Because neither of us was hiding anymore. As we stood to leave, Dad hesitated. Your mom doesn't know I came. I stopped. She doesn't. He shook his head. She wanted to. What changed? She was afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd refuse to see her. I slipped my coat on. I almost refused to see you. I know. He didn't sound offended. Only honest. Before we stepped outside, he turned toward me again. Whatever happens after today. I waited. I'm grateful you gave me an hour. I nodded. So am I. 3 weeks later, my phone rang just after dinner. Mom. I stared at the screen until the ringing almost stopped. Then I answered. Hello. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Hi, sweetheart. She hadn't called me that in years. Hi, Mom. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally she whispered. Your father told me you met. He did. I'm glad. Another silence. I've been trying to find the courage to call. You found it. A quiet laugh escaped her. I suppose I did. She took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. I closed my eyes. I'm listening. When you graduated. Her voice broke. I thought I was teaching you independence. I remained silent. I kept telling myself that because you were responsible, mature, and successful. You didn't need us as much as Ryan did. She stopped to compose herself. I didn't realize love isn't measured by who needs it more. Tears blurred my vision. I understand that now. I know. No. She interrupted gently. I don't think you do. There was pain in her voice I'd never heard before. I've replayed that day every night for years. Another pause. I remember exactly what you were wearing. I smiled through my tears. The blue honor cords. Yes. And your speech. You weren't there. I know. The words barely escaped her lips. I've watched the recording dozens of times. I froze. There was a recording? Ryan found one online years ago. She sniffled. I couldn't finish it the first time. Why? Because halfway through. She struggled to continue. I realized every word you were saying was something you needed your father and me to hear. Neither of us spoke. Outside my apartment window, evening lights flickered across the city skyline. I've wanted to tell you something for 10 years. I waited. I'm proud of you. Those words finally came. Not rushed. Not automatic. Not because I had earned another promotion. Not because a magazine printed my name. Simply because I was her daughter. A younger version of me would have waited her entire life to hear them. The woman I had become accepted them quietly. Thank you. I know they don't erase anything. They don't. I also know I can't ask you to pretend none of it happened. You can't. I only hope. Her voice trembled again. That one day we can build something honest. I looked around my apartment. The home I had built. The life I had created. The peace I had fought so hard to find. I think honesty is the only place we can start. On the other end of the line, I heard her crying softly. For the first time. Neither of us tried to hide it. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees behind Ryan's house, we carried our coffee onto the back porch. The air was warm, and a gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging from the roof. No one felt rushed to leave. For years, family gatherings had always revolved around schedules, games, or obligations. This time, people simply stayed. Ryan leaned back in his chair. You know what I remember most about graduation? I looked at him. What? The drive home. Dad lowered his eyes. Ryan continued quietly. I kept thinking we should have turned the car around. Silence settled over the porch. I almost said something. He rubbed his hands together. But I was 17. You were a kid, I reminded him. I know. He smiled sadly. I just wish I'd been a braver kid. No. I shook my head. You were kinder than you realize. He looked surprised. You were the only person in the family who came to my room that night. His eyes softened. You remember that? I remember everything. He laughed quietly. I figured. Dad stood and disappeared inside the house. When he returned, he carried a worn blue binder. I've been meaning to give this to you. He handed it to me. What is it? Open it. Inside were dozens of newspaper clippings. Academic competitions. Science fairs. Debate championships. Scholarship announcements. Every article that had ever mentioned my name. I slowly turned the pages. Some clippings were nearly 20 years old. Others had tiny notes written in the margins. Great job. So proud. Look at our girl. I looked up at Dad. You kept all of these? He nodded. Every one. My voice barely came out. Why didn't I know? He took a long breath. Because I confused providing for my family with loving them well. No one interrupted him. I thought working overtime, paying bills, coaching Ryan's games. He paused. That all of it spoke for itself. He looked directly at me. It didn't. I slowly closed the binder. No. It should have. But it didn't. His shoulders sagged. I know. Mom reached over and rested her hand on his arm. We both failed you. I immediately shook my head. You didn't fail me. They looked surprised. You hurt me. I swallowed. Those are different things. Neither of them spoke. If you'd failed me. I smiled gently. I wouldn't be sitting here. Dad frowned slightly. I don't understand. I became who I am because teachers believed in me. I looked toward Ryan. Because my brother showed me kindness. Then back at my parents. And because eventually, your mistakes taught me the kind of person I wanted to become. Mom quietly wiped another tear away. I've spent years hoping you'd forgive us. I have. Dad looked stunned. You have. I forgave you a long time ago. The words surprised even me. I just couldn't trust you yet. Mom nodded slowly. That's fair. It is. Dad leaned back in his chair and looked toward the setting sun. You know. He smiled to himself. I always thought success meant raising a perfect family. Ryan laughed. I think we all know that ship sailed. Everyone chuckled. Dad laughed too. No. He shook his head. I think success is getting a second chance, and not wasting it. As darkness settled over the backyard, we helped clear the table together. There was no awkwardness. No pretending. No walking on eggshells. Just ordinary conversation. The kind I had secretly wished for since I was a little girl. While drying the last plate, Mom smiled at me. I'm proud of you. She said it naturally. Without an audience. Without a special occasion. Without waiting for an achievement. Simply because she wanted me to know. For the first time in my life. Those words didn't feel like something I had earned. They felt like something I had always deserved. And somehow, that made them mean even more. Years passed quietly after that summer. Not because life became easier. Because it became fuller. Dad retired the following spring. Instead of rushing from one responsibility to another, he finally had time to notice the small moments he had missed for so many years. Mom volunteered at the local library, where she discovered she loved helping children learn to read. Every Tuesday evening she called just to tell me about the funny things her students had said. Ryan married the woman he'd been dating for 3 years. When he asked me to stand beside him as his best person, I laughed. I thought that job belonged to Mom. He grinned. She's already crying too much. The wedding was held at a small vineyard outside town. Nothing extravagant. Just family, close friends, and a warm September afternoon. As guests gathered before the ceremony, I found myself standing near the same kind of folding chairs that had once reminded me of my own graduation. Only this time, the feeling was completely different. Emma. I turned to see Mom walking toward me. She held a small gift box wrapped in navy blue paper. This is for you. It's not my wedding. I know. She smiled. I've been waiting years to give it to you. Inside the box was a silver charm bracelet. One charm immediately caught my attention. A tiny graduation cap. Another was shaped like an open book. The last one. A small heart. On the back was a simple engraving. You were always enough. I looked up. Mom's eyes were already filled with tears. I wish I'd told you that when you were 18. I reached over and hugged her. You just did. The ceremony began a few minutes later. Ryan looked happier than I had ever seen him. As he exchanged vows, I realized something. The little boy who had unknowingly stood in the center of our family's imbalance had grown into a man who valued fairness more than attention. People really could change. If they were willing to. During the reception, Ryan tapped his glass. I want to say something. The room grew quiet. I know today is supposed to be about us. He smiled at his new wife. But there are 2 people I need to thank. He looked directly at me. My sister taught me what quiet strength looks like. I immediately shook my head. No. He laughed. Yes. Guests smiled. You spent years showing me that success isn't about being noticed. He paused. It's about becoming someone worth respecting. He raised his glass. So here's to my sister. The smartest person I've ever known. The room applauded. I felt my face grow warm. Not from embarrassment. From peace. Because this applause wasn't filling an old wound. It was simply celebrating a life already full. Later that evening, Dad found me standing alone beneath strings of white lights. You know. He smiled. I was thinking about your graduation. I laughed. I had a feeling you might. I keep wishing I could go back. I know. If I could. He looked toward the dance floor. I'd stay for every second. I slipped my arm through his. I believe you. He smiled. Thank you. No. I squeezed his arm gently. Thank you for becoming the father who can say that. He didn't answer. He simply stood beside me as music drifted across the vineyard. Sometimes healing doesn't erase yesterday. It simply makes tomorrow possible. And standing there beneath the evening sky, surrounded by people who had learned to love one another honestly, I realized something that would stay with me forever. The greatest victory wasn't becoming successful enough to make my parents regret the past. It was becoming whole enough that I no longer needed their regret to feel complete.